Let's get rusty! There are a few ways of creating a rust effect on our wargame miniatures, but how good is Army Painter's rust effects? Today we will find out. According to the official guide for the Army Painter rust effects, we should start with a base coat of a reddish brown and then stipple the rust effects over it. That is what we will do here on this Ork Trukk that I have made for my Project Mork. This truck has already featured in a few other videos. I used it to experiment with mud effects like Sterling mud and Army Painter's mud effects, and also to experiment with painting camo patterns. You can find these other videos on my channel page. When I was comparing Army Painter's wet mud effects with Citadel Sterling mud, I was a bit disappointed to find that the Army Painter wet mud effect did not have any texture in it. It was really just a colour, unlike the Sterling mud, which has a very noticeable amount of particulate matter in it. This is what I will be curious to see in Army Painter's rust effects. Will it provide some rusty texture, or is it only a rusty colour? I think it is quite desirable for a rust effect to add a little texture to a surface. Rust in the real world will tend to flake up the smooth surface of a metal. I would have liked to put the Army Painter rust effects up against a Citadel equivalent, but there is no such product. We can, however, use Sterling mud again as a textured base and then use a orange paint over it to colour it more like rust. You can see the truck now is still not quite ready for the rust effects. It has been almost fully painted and I have it all mudded up nicely. All that is left is to introduce some scuffs and scratches and then rust up that exposed metal. I just stipple on a basic metal paint now on the areas where I want the paint to look scratched off the metal underneath. Now we have some fresh bare metal, we have the canvas ready for some rusting effects. Since stippling is the brush technique we will be using throughout this experiment, I have picked out a few brushes with stiff and splayed bristles. Stippling is not a job for a nice new brush with a fine point. First, I try out the Army Painter method. I stipple on some of the reddish brown paint to be the base layer. I am using for this Army Painter's fur brown. I place it over a good amount of bare metal, but also over bits of the painted metal. I try to focus it on the more damaged areas of the truck. Now let's squirt out a bit of the rust effects onto the palettes. We can see that the colour is quite plausibly rust coloured. It is a dullish matte orange. However, there is no sign of any texture in it. Oh well, let us see how it goes on. I stipple it over the previous coat of fur brown, trying to leave some of that brown still showing in places to give us a mottled variation in colour and tone. Well, I have gone over most of the outside of the truck now with this method. I can't complain too much. It looks pretty good, but the lack of any actual texture in the rust effects is disappointing. It is not so much an effect as just a rust colour. As a colour, it is very good though. The lack of texture is hardly a deal breaker, I suppose. It is easy enough to give paint some texture by mixing it in with some fine sand or something like that. Perhaps I will try that out in another video one day. Okay, let's try the alternative method of creating a rust effect using Sterling mud. I stipple on Sterling mud on the metal of the inside of the truck. You can see the floor is already pretty well covered in Sterling mud. To represent actual mud, rusted metal will have a rough, flaky surface, but it is more orange in colour than Sterling mud. So over the Sterling mud, I stipple some of the lava orange. That orange is probably a bit bright to pass for rust, but a light coat should let some of that dark Sterling mud show through, and that will mute that orange saturation a bit. Yeah, you know, I think this is a better way to make a rust effect, especially if you want that rough, rusty texture to show. Anywho, my truck is really done now, and looking so good. Tell me in the comments if this is not truly the very best looking Ork Trukk on YouTube. You may also check the links in this video's description for some nice discounts on raw gaming models and materials. You can also subscribe to see more of my videos. And bye for now!